Another way you can gain some flex points is the special case if you're a seller. A seller meaning you're selling the product. Let's go ahead and look at first though, the buyer. So here's a buyer. That we can see he's a buyer right here. Now this buyer has a maximum purchase amount. So their maximum purchase is 1,100. And you can see here, very important, do not buy more than this. If you are a buyer, you cannot, not go over this maximum purchase. It is super important. Very, very important. This maximum purchase means that a buyer has an inventory, maybe like a warehouse, and you cannot put more products into the warehouse. So think of a, let me get my line here. Think of a warehouse like this. It's got big doors up front. And you can put your products in there, you pile them up, pile them up, and the warehouse gets full. If you have more products, you cannot put them in. They won't go in anymore. It would cost more and more money for you to have the inventory, and it becomes impossible very quickly. So, the special case for the buyer, very special, you must remember it, is that you cannot go over this maximum. Never ever. If you do, game over, you lose. However, in the case of the seller, things are different. In the case of the seller, like this case here, we have a seller. In the case of a seller, we have our maximum sales. Now the maximum sales, in this case, 1,030. Can we go over it? Well, for the seller, you can, yes, you can go over. Why is that? Well, because the seller is different than the buyer. The seller has like a factory, like a long assembly line, right? And they make the product on their assembly line inside their factory, right? And as they make the product, it comes off and they can ship it off. Well, the factory usually runs maybe 10 hours a day or 8 hours a day, but you can increase that. You could run for 15 hours a day, or you could run for 20 hours a day, or you could run for 24 hours a day, and you would produce more. Maybe you run for 3 days a week, and now you can run for 4 days a week, or even 7 days a week. And if you do that, you would produce more and more. So, the seller can go over the maximum sales, yes. But it's not for free, because you have to run the factory more, so it's going to cost you money. What will it cost? How will you spend this? Flex points. You need to spend flex points. So let's look at this example here. So here's a seller. We come down to the flex points section, and we can see that this seller has received some bonus for, why? Because they had 1, 2, 3, 4 deals with different groups. That was a bonus. Good for them. That's very good. But they also have overproduction. So how did they get overproduction? Because the total number of units is beyond their maximum. Now, how does this fee work? Well, it's written down here at the bottom. Right down here. If you produce over your maximum, you have to spend 1 point of flex for every 10% over your maximum. Every 10%. 1 flex point. So it's not cheap. It's a little bit expensive because you're going to use up a flex point. So how do you decide to do this? Well, or why would you do it? Why would you do this when you're going to have 10% over? Why would somebody do that? Well, let's look at an example here. I think I have a good example. Here we go. This is a group, and this group is a seller. And you can see they made a lot of deals. Why did they make a lot of deals? Because they must have found other groups that would buy their products for a lower price, for a slower delivery, for a lower quality, so they could make more and more flex points. And they kept producing, and they produced so much that you can see they actually end up spending 52 flex points in overproduction. 52. But even though they spend 52, their total flex points they're getting is 91.5. How did they get so many flex points? Well, they get the flex points from their quality gap and their delivery gap. Look at all of those. Look at all of those. So in the role-playing game, in the RPG, you need to consider, you can spend money to produce more, but can you make more money than it costs to produce more? And that's the question here. You need to think about it very carefully. How many groups can you find, and how much of a gap can you make flex points on, and then how much will it cost? Because it's not cheap. 1 flex point for every 10% over. So if we look here, for this group, their maximum sales was 1,000, which means that for every 100 more, they're going to spend a flex point. And you can see from their deals, they made many deals over 100. But remember, you get an extra flex point just for making a deal that's more than 10%, that's with a different group. So right away you get 1, but it's got to be a different group. And then you need to see if you can get a gap. So you can see this team really worked hard. What did they do? Contacting many different groups, making many different deals, trying to make sure that they can get some gap to make up for the price, for the cost of overproduction. Okay, so just very quickly to review, this special case is only true for the seller, not the buyer. Not the buyer. The buyer cannot do this. Only the seller can do this. The buyer cannot ever go over your maximum purchase. Cannot. The seller can go over, but they have to spend points on it.